What's up, everybody? It's your favorite gay-looking straight boy Hunter Avalone here, back with another video. Before we begin, I just want to ask you guys, how are you all doing? How? Wait, that's an indigenous people's word. I think I might be a raging racist at heart! Yeah, that's right, guys. Today we're talking about liberals. More specifically, virtue signaling liberals, and how they annoy the absolute crap out of me. There's a significant difference between a leftist and a liberal. Leftists tend to push for more systemic change. They also tend to be socialist or communist, whereas liberals are much more about complacency. They tend to be more capitalist, and yes, far too often, they tend to be the ones virtue signaling. Thankfully, I'm an enlightened centrist, so I'm none of these things. Hey, by the way, check out my new merch. There's a clear distinction between these two groups, and although the right would have you believe that a leftist is just someone who isn't afraid to criticize the right and someone who thinks trans people are human, that's just not true, and I think the distinction between those two groups is important. Now, since George Floyd's horrific, unjustified murder at the hands of police officers, there has been a significantly heightened awareness around social stigma, social inequalities, and systemic issues, specifically for the Black community here in America. But whenever there's massive push for significant social change, you always have your complacent liberals doing the bare minimum so they can pat themselves on the back and jerk off at how woke they are. There's a famous quote by MLK where he talks about the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the KKK, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. And I'm sorry, but I think far too often these virtue signaling liberals fall under this category of shallow understanding from people of goodwill. A little while back, I was made aware of this petition that has almost 5,000 signatures, by the way, talking about how Trader Joe's should remove racist packaging from their products. We demand that Trader Joe's remove racist branding and packaging from its stores. The grocery chain labels some of its ethnic foods with modifications of Joe that belies a narrative of exoticism that perpetuates harmful stereotypes. So this right here, I think, is a good example of just virtue signaling and not doing anything to really make significant change. This comes at the heels of the removal of Aunt Jemima, or was it Uncle Ben? It was one of those Black people. And I also think this is just reading a little too deep into some shit right now. Is some of this packaging racist? I mean, maybe, but at the same time, we have Black people being disproportionately murdered by the state, murdered by police. I feel like those are bigger issues that we should all kind of be rallying behind instead of this bullshit. Like, they claim that it's offensive because the founder of the grocery store built his brand from a racist book and a controversial theme park attraction, both of which have received criticism for romanticizing Western imperialism and fetishizing non-Western peoples. Dude, sometimes you just gotta take a step back. I think nuance is really important, but sometimes there's such thing as getting a little bit too nuanced. I don't really think anything is gonna change whether Trader Joe's keeps this packaging or changes it. I think this does fall under MLK's category of shallow understanding from people of goodwill. There are bigger issues right now affecting minority groups in America, much bigger issues. This does not help obtain justice. I think this just makes people feel good and feel like they're doing something when they're really not doing anything at all. Another great example of this comes from this crazy woman in Canada who says, "Why I decided to take the word chief out of my CEO title to respect indigenous people." Well, I would call this woman brave, but that might also be offensive. So thank you, Catherine Room. There's obviously no room for improvement there. No, you've gone all the way. The chief of racism is dead. She talks about writing about Black Lives Matter. She talks about how she is a stickler for inclusive language. And then she says, one particularly courageous colleague pointed out that I was using a word in my title, President and Chief Executive Officer, that represents something deeply meaningful to many indigenous peoples. So this woman's job title was President and Chief Executive Officer, and some butthurt colleague pointed out how that's offensive to Native Americans or something. Does anyone even equate the word chief when it's in this context to Native Americans? Hey, we have to swing by the chief executive officer's house today. Oh, what? You mean we're going to a teepee? Like, what are you talking about? So already we can tell that this is fucking useless, and the fact that she wrote an entire article, like just jerking herself off about how she removed the word chief from her title, it just shows that these people are doing the bare minimum. For what? Are they really helping anyone? Are they helping acquire justice for minority groups? No, they're exhibiting shallow understanding with their good intentions. And it's funny too, because she even goes on to actually debunk her own argument here, but then just kind of skims over it anyway. She says, the origin of my original title is European. That doesn't give me a pass. Okay, so she just skips past this, but I think that's kind of important actually. Chief is a European title as explained in the definition above. The term was applied to American Indians. It is not an indigenous word. This comes from a blog actually written by an indigenous person explaining this. He says, what I found interesting is that the articles I read on the topic overlooked an obvious aspect that should have arisen as part of the discussion, namely that chief is a European title. As explained in the definition above, the term was applied to American Indians. It is not an indigenous word. How would the numerous specific cultures spread out across the vast landscape of what is now known as North America share a common term for their leader? So maybe if she was like, I'm removing it so it's not offensive, maybe, but she's like, it's a word that's honored and respected in First Nations culture and conveys a meaning very different to organizational leadership. You're not doing anything, lady. You have done absolutely nothing. And yeah, the fact that the word chief is actually a European term, it's not even an indigenous word, makes it look really stupid that you're writing this article patting yourself on the back about doing this. So upon reflection, I have changed my title within the organization to President and Lead Executive Officer. Wow. Talk about bravery. Talk about really standing up for justice for indigenous people. It's funny that this woman is on some tangent about just changing some like meaningless trivial word, when at the same time, Canada right now is confronting racism in their police force in the wake of indigenous deaths. So over here in America, where we have black people getting killed by the cops, Canada is dealing with the problem with indigenous people being murdered by police. Since April 6, indigenous people have been killed by police, including a woman killed during a wellness check, and a video went viral of a First Nations chief being beaten by Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers in March. Race troubles in Canadian policing have been thrust into the spotlight in recent weeks, following the global Black Lives Matter protest and the cessation of cases of police violence against indigenous people. So Catherine, this woman who is president and lead executive officer of this technical safety organization in Canada, is talking about how she changed the word chief out of her title to respect indigenous people, while literally Canada is dealing with indigenous people being murdered by police. I think there is no better example of the white moderate than this woman right here. This woman with the most shallow understanding. She has good intentions, I'm sure, but she's not doing anything at all. She's just in the way of real change. She's a distraction. Both this article and this stupid petition, they are just so trivial and meaningless. And yeah, it gets under my skin. It annoys the poop out of me. But there you guys have it, just a couple examples of these virtue signaling liberals doing absolutely nothing to push for real legitimate systemic change, and instead falling directly in line with MLK's definition of the white moderate. Pretty cringe. Please give this video a like, comment below, and subscribe to the channel. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all soon. Peace.